Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I'm here with Irene McAleese. I'm on Gubby Gubby Country. Irene, I know from the Asia Pacific Bike Riding Conference, and we've had a number of guests on the show from that conference. Pretty much everyone, including Phil Latz, we had on. And Phil spoke about a podcast that Irene, you have got going with him. But the reason I wanted to invite you on to the show is because you did a fantastic presentation. You had the worst time slot possible on a 2-day conference. You had the very last presentation after 2 days of solid presentations where everyone was cooked. That presentation was completely amazing because I think you started it with a range of snapshots from previous presentations that we had all watched in the previous days. And you opened your own presentation with that. So it brought us along with you. I thought that was completely brilliant. And then you talked about your product, which I thought, oh my goodness, this sounds like such an amazing product. Perhaps, Irene, you would like to say which country you're calling from. Also, what made you interested in this area of riding a bike and how long have you been going for? If you want to talk about your company and your product and why you were at the conference, you're welcome to do so.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to join your podcast. It's a fantastic initiative that you've kickstarted here to showcase or to give people a voice as well in your community and also have other people come on and share their experiences. So it's a great use case for a podcast. So well done, and I'm really proud to be part of it. So yes, my name's Irene McAleese. I'm co-founder and chief strategy officer at See.Sense. I'm calling you from the Turrbal and Jagera country in Brisbane. Yeah, it's really nice for me to be back in Brisbane, actually. I lived away for 20 years. I'm from Brisbane originally. Yeah, I've been away for 20 years, London, Singapore, and Northern Ireland. Yeah, it's really great to be back and to hopefully share some of the experiences that I've learned about cycling along the way in those various places back with people here in Brisbane and Australia. As for being the last speaker on the day of the conference, I didn't mind that too much, to be honest. It was great. It was my first introduction. I was literally just back in Australia for a couple of months at that point, and it was an honour to be involved in the program and to hear from some really fantastic speakers and to hear what's been going on in Australia. I was really pleased to be able to wrap in some of the insights that I had learnt over those couple of days, in many places echoing some things that I'd learnt overseas, but also then hopefully sharing some new ideas as well.
And so what is it that made you interested in bike riding? Because clearly if you've got this product which is about bikes and bike sensors and things like that, and we'll go on to that in a minute, but what is it that brought you even into that? Have you been riding bikes since you were 4 like Phil or something like that?
I used to ride my bike to school. I lived in Redcliffe. I used to ride up and down the peninsula. I also had a boyfriend who lived in Caboolture, actually. So I even cycled from Redcliffe up to Caboolture a few times. I left cycling behind when I went on to university and didn't come back to it for some time. When I was living in London, as an option to commute to work was really there. Philip, my husband, was doing that in London quite a lot. And it was actually then when we moved to Singapore that we noticed that it was significantly harder to commute by bike in Singapore than it was in London at that time, just because there were less cyclists there and you didn't get that feeling of safety of having other cyclists around you. And particularly, I think the road culture was a bit different as well in Singapore, probably because they were less used to having cyclists on the road or giving them space. That there was also this culture of really jumping in and cutting across cyclists. Part of the culture is, they call it kiasu, me first. They're quite happy to jump in, even to other car riders, not necessarily between cars and cyclists. Phil actually came home and said, I don't know if I can keep cycling to work. It just feels too unsafe. And that's when we thought, well, don't really want to give up the cycling to work, because he was a busy executive and it was his only time to get cycling into the day. And that's where he fell back on his original training as an electronic and software engineer. And he thought, actually, what if I could make a bike light that would make me more visible on the road? That was the genesis of See.Sense. I had my second daughter there in Singapore. I used to take her to nursery, the youngest one on the bike with me and pregnant with the other one. And I used to do those kind of trips in Singapore as well. But yeah, then we moved from Singapore to Northern Ireland, where Philip is from. And that's when we decided to launch See.Sense. We decided to be based in Northern Ireland near Philip's family. So yeah, I mean, cycling has been for me a little bit in and out. I think for Phil, more as a commuter cyclist, we're not really part of the Lycra brigade, so to speak. But having said that, I realise that cycling is a very broad church. There's lots of different types of cyclists out there. We have certainly amongst our customers at See.Sense people who buy our bike lights for all different reasons, all different types of cycling that people would do. So when we started See.Sense, we gave up successful corporate careers to do this. Part of it was about realising, if we can help get more people on bikes, and we think that's a good thing for society, less congestion, less pollution, better health. So that's what makes us motivated to do what we do at See.Sense, and it's more an understanding of cycling's contribution to the world.
What I was really surprised about was Singapore has this reputation for those wonderful trees and great public transport and great active transport and lots of exercise. I thought, oh, surely it's like Paris or Amsterdam, which has got amazing bike paths everywhere. But you're saying, no, that's not really the truth, that actually it's quite aggressive there and you didn't feel as safe as London. That really surprised me.
Singapore is an amazing city. There's a lot going for it, and it has got great public transport. Most people can pretty much walk to public transport from where they live, and that's been something that's been designed in, so that's great. The cycling that's there, from what I saw anyway, was mostly around sports cycling along the coastal routes, less of this more utility or commute cycling. That's really the difference that I was talking about there.
So I asked somebody to listen to your podcast with Phil Latz. This was her reply. She says, here's what I took away: an awesome bike light that uses AI to not only predict individual cyclist behavior, but uses data of others to predict the likelihood of crashes. It also predicts potholes before they develop. It's been very successful overseas, and now southern states are giving it a go via the local government authorities, so local councils. Unfortunately, it will come down to the willingness to look at and act on the data these lights are capable of capturing. Very brilliant idea, these lights. I definitely want one. The lights get brighter when you are near a spot where close calls have been, or you do an unusual riding behavior such as swerving. What I loved was the light took info from the professional rider as well as the novice rider and combined the info, leading to early warnings of dangerous spots, etc. As long as the data doesn't sit on a shelf and gather dust, I see this as a great step forward for safety. So that's the review just from listening to the interview with Phil Latz.
That sounds a fantastic summary. Congratulations to your friend. Sometimes I think, oh, we've spoken for so long. I hope Phil and I got across the key points, but definitely sounds a nice summary. So thank you very much.
I thought for some reason it was something that maybe councils use and they ride around with, or you can buy it somehow. Tell me how it works, and also what it's like to start a company, because I know a lot of startups, they start and then they fall over. Also about just the time it took, because you came from both successful careers. There's obviously money and a whole lot of stuff that you have to deal with, time, juggling various things. You've got family. So how did you go with all that side of thing, as well as how does the app actually work?
A few questions in there, so I'll maybe chunk out firstly what it is and how it works, and then I'll give you a bit more on how we developed it and the backstory. The See.Sense light is using our patented sensor technology, which is inside the bike light itself, and it is monitoring the environment of the cyclist as they're riding up to 800 times a second. Really, really granular insights about the experience of the cyclist. We would be able to see swerving patterns or braking patterns, or even the road surface condition that the cyclist is traveling over. So the light is picking up all of this information. Then we use edge processing and AI on the device as well to profile the individual rider. And all of this processing is happening on the light in real time. And the data is then sent via the light to your phone app, and then from the phone app to the cloud. Or we have another device, which is a GPS tracker, which can be fitted onto a bike. So there's no light, it's just the GPS tracker. These are used on bike fleets, and there's no app involved with that. It's literally sending the data straight from that device, which looks like a black matchbox size device, to the cloud. So rather than just the basic GPS data that you might get from an app showing the location and the speed, so it's combining lots and lots of additional sensor data on the swerving and the braking and road surface and collisions and things like this. So when we take that data, it's anonymized and we aggregate the data so there's no individual cyclist is identifiable. But what is actually interesting for cities is to look at the patterns in the data. So not where one person swerved or braked, but where a lot of people are swerving and braking is where it becomes interesting. And so the use cases for that data for cities are things like safety and cycle infrastructure planning. But there's actually a use case back for the individual cyclist as well, because all of those sensors that are in the light, when the light's reacting to its environment, it will flash brighter and faster in those riskier moments. It creates this daylight visible level brightness that will help bring attention on the road. And then the sensors are using their power efficiently. So you get not only that daylight visible level brightness, but a really long runtime of more than 15 hours on a single charge. So that's why a lot of cyclists really just light the bike light as a bike light itself, because of its daylight visible kind of reactive functions. But then there's also the knowledge that the aggregated data can be very useful for a city. And then we also provide lots of features back in the app as well for the individual rider, like crash detection alerts. So if they have a crash, it will send their location to their nominated contact, theft alert, ride stats, and they can make reports in the app as well about maybe they've seen a pothole or had a close pass or something like this. You can report that in the app with 250 characters and say what that was. So all that can be sent to the city as well. So yeah, it's got individual benefits to the cyclists with that information back in the app and how the light reacts, or for the GPS tracker theft tracking capability. But really the bigger picture for See.Sense is how we work with cities to use the data. And your friend is right. The crux of it is it's wonderful that we are able to collect this data, and it's quite unique for the data that is out there for cycling. But obviously the challenge is to help cities be able to use that data for decision making. And that's some of the work we're doing around that as well. There's lots being done in that place as well around data dashboards and reporting and things like that. Yeah, as for how we developed it, my husband and I, as I said, we were living in Singapore at the time. When Phil had the idea, he actually went back to his colleagues. And at the time, it really wasn't about the data. It was more about having the bike light flash and react to its environment to make him more visible on the road. That was the original concept of an intelligent bike light. So he actually went back to his colleagues. He worked for a bank. They had a big community in the bank that were all cyclists. And he said, "Oh, guys, what do you think about this bike light that I've developed? You're probably more serious cyclists than me," because he didn't consider himself to be a serious cyclist. He just commuted a bit on his bike. And these were what he would have considered the more hardcore cyclists. And they all said, "Phil, this is really brilliant. If you could make one like that for me, I would buy it from you." So he had lots of people saying this. Phil and I were sort of the couple that always thought about, what would it be like to run our own business? But I've never found an idea that it was compelling enough. So this is something that I thought, talking with Phil, yes, this would really resonate with our values, that we feel that let's give this a go. If we can help cyclists, improve cyclist safety, then that would be a worthwhile thing to do. We gave up our careers and moved to Northern Ireland. We launched the product on a crowdfunding website, and we were really delighted that we were able to raise the funds from that first campaign, which helped us to then go away and develop the first run of the lights. And most importantly, what that did for us was to show that this wasn't just us that thought it was a good idea, that we got this validation from the market, that other cyclists thought this was a good idea as well. And what's really been the See.Sense story is that we've done a number of campaigns with really the cyclist community coming together to support us over the years to be able to develop a number of different successions of this product, where we've been able to also learn from the cycling community about what was important for them. And people have given input and support for us along the way, even in the design and development of future iterations of the light. So that's been a really interesting side of the business. These campaigns gave us the initial traction to show that there was demand in the market, but it really was once we realized that the data that we were collecting from the light was so granular that it almost seemed wrong that it was only being used just to power the light to flash for its environment, that we were monitoring the environment 800 times a second. We had such amazing information that we realized we had to get that data off the light and up into the cloud where it could be aggregated and used. So that's where we went on the journey to then make it a connected product and to then start working with cities to use the data that we collect. And around that time, which was around about 2016, that's where we did an equity fundraise. So we've raised about £1.1 million back then through VC investment into the company, which gave us some runway to do more R&D and development, particularly around the data side of the business. From about 2017, we started doing our first data projects with cities. And back then, this was pre-GDPR. The data privacy regulations came in 2018 in Europe. So 2017, we did our first project, which was really interesting, just testing out stuff. We've kind of been at the forefront of this for cycling data IoT. So there wasn't really anyone else to look to. So we were, how do cyclists feel about collecting data? How would we handle huge volumes of data that are going to come in? How do we build the back-end system to be able to cope with that? And how do we engage with cities? We're not city planners. How do we engage with cities? How do we try to get them to use the data? How do we make a business model out of this, which is sustainable? So these are all things that we've kind of experimented with over the years. And each time we've done one of these projects with a city, it has been a fantastic opportunity for us because we've been able to learn from cities that we work with. In many cases, they've helped us to kind of co-create either the data dashboards or solutions that we've come up with. So yeah, it's been a great learning curve, an interesting journey, and a hell of a lot of hard work. But yeah, definitely something that we feel proud of.
Yeah, so what I hear in that is what was important to you is you came up with an idea, but then actually it was a lot of collaboration throughout, and to hear back from the people who would actually be using it, whether it would be a useful thing to do and what would they need, what would they use, and to think about what would be their concerns before it arose, or to look at, as you say, what's it like to gather all the data on people? So how does that work? To really put yourself in the shoes of people who, A, you don't know, you don't live their world, the bold and the brave cyclists that weave in amongst drivers, which I think is perfectly terrifying. Gosh, I would never do that. But also people in at councils, in at cities, trying to imagine, well, what would they be important? Because Philip came from banking. What area were you in before this?
I worked in change management, actually. I worked as a management consultant in change management and human resources. I originally did a psychology degree, and a lot of people stuff and change management and stakeholders is really my expertise. So funnily enough, even though I work in a technology business, those skills have actually been super useful.
And I would have thought it was really critical, actually, to understand you can say something, you can put an idea out there, but then there's the skill of listening into what people are really saying and what they're really wanting, and trying to understand and sift through a lot of that. That's a skill. There's a competitor I was aware of before I was aware of your product that has a camera and films, say, cars and number plates behind to pick up the data, maybe if they're going too close or they are harassing people. Now, it doesn't sound like yours does that. Yours is more granular, more anonymized. Are you able to report driver misdemeanors and inappropriate behaviors to the police, say?
No, we don't have a camera on ours. Ours is really just a sensor inside the light. So sensing the movement of the cyclist essentially, or vibrations and things coming through the road. We're not picking up any visuals, which has an advantage that it keeps the price down because cameras are more expensive. So the sensors in the light are cheaper, and that's why it's a more available, scalable kind of product. So there was that part of the consideration. Plus, obviously, we get a lot of information from the sensors. We can see if people are swerving or braking. That could be an indication that they're in a near miss zone or a hazardous area. We do get people who use our app as well to make a report. So they can report a perception of a close pass. And we do have use cases in the UK where the police have actually used our close pass reports to set up enforcement areas and understand, because they don't have a lot of data. So really to be able to say, this is an area where lots of cyclists are telling us that they have close passes, and the police actually went there and set up enforcement zones. That was in the West Midlands in the UK. The camera lights that you might be talking about that are filming drivers coming close, that's an interesting tool. I'm not aware really of cities using that data, or the fact that they've been able to aggregate that data up in a meaningful way. I think when it comes to data, there's no real silver bullet that answers every single question that a city has. You will have, for instance, cycle counters. There will be cameras mounted on junctions. Say there could be travel surveys, census data, other things. So, I mean, all of those different sources of data are useful. And to be honest, there's not enough cycling data as there is. So I think the clever thing for cities is to be able to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each approach and look at how they can potentially combine data sources to fill the gaps of what is there. So we wouldn't say that See.Sense data is the only data source you're ever going to need, but that it can be very complementary to existing data sources that cities have, and yes, definitely fill a lot of those gaps.
I'm just as inspired now as I was when I heard about your presentation earlier on this year. I think what I like about it is the level of detail, because you can have a gross picture. I had an incident once not far from home where the truck behind me, I actually know who, I met him later, and he said, I know who you are. And I said, oh, that was you. Okay. And we figured out that he was the truck and I was on the bike. And I moved out slightly because in the road, it's like this where the road has dipped, and it feels like there's all these small little cracks in the road that make it a little bit feel unsafe when you're on a bike. But to the driver, it's nothing. As he said, he's like, what are you doing? Trying to swerve to avoid killing an ant. He's in a truck, somebody who works at the local council, and he's in a maintenance vehicle because he's a little bit higher, and he just didn't see that tiny little road marking because he's going at whatever speed. Whereas for me on a bicycle, it's actually a lot. So to point out those sorts of really small details, I think what your product, if I've got this correct, it picks up that stuff. And why do people move around that space, and where do they move around? That's what I hear.
Especially where you don't have a lot of cyclists. If you've got some cycle counters somewhere, the cycle counters are great for capturing every cyclist that goes past. But cyclists move wherever they want to move. So whatever routes they're going on, you can't have the cycle counters everywhere. So in one sense, you're getting this mobile data coverage wherever the cyclist has gone, which is going to inform you what are the desire lines, what are the popular routes that people are taking. But then you can start to see a lot more. And your example just then, Wendy, made me think of a project we did in Dublin. What we did there was we disaggregated the data. So where we've got enough coverage, we can actually disaggregate it and say, what's the experience of women cyclists on this route compared to the male cyclists on this route? We took the top 10 most popular routes in Dublin and said, look, let's see what the differences are in terms of swerving, braking, road surface condition. And we did see some differences in swerving and braking. But what was really strange for me was, at first, was why is there a difference in the road surface condition? Because they're on the same road. So how can the male and female be getting a different score? The men's score is smoother. The women's score is rougher. And I was sort of scratching my head, and I thought, when I first started riding and I was less confident on the road, I used to ride off into the gutter. I used to think that that was the safest place for me to be, to put space between myself myself in the car. It wasn't until I did cycle training that I became aware that no, actually sometimes you have to take the primary position, take up the center of the road, feel confident that even if it's maybe not safe, that you have to even hold up cars behind you. And of course, from what we know now with the work we've done on road surfaces, that roads aren't perfectly flat, they're concave. They're designed so water will run from the middle down to the edges of the road to the gutter. And of course, that's where the deterioration starts to happen first on a road closest to the gutter. That's where a road will get rougher first before it becomes smooth. So it made me think, oh, wow, this is actually showing us that these are routes where women are tending to ride closer into the gutter. What is that telling us about women's perception of safety on these routes? And I just found it really fascinating because as cities want to create more modal shift, it's really about, well, women can be like the indicator species, right, on a network. You see lots of women, it's probably fairly safe. You have better representation of women that are riding in countries like Amsterdam, for example, and then where the design is fast-moving traffic, women have a different perception of safety and they will have a different experience. So that's the kind of things that I find really fascinating in the data, and definitely, is a richer picture about what's going on the network. That just resonated me with a little bit with what you'd said there, Wendy.
We're coming up to the end of time, and as we head up towards the end of time, my friend, who is my number one listener, she's stuck at home with a couple of little kids. They go to daycare a couple of days a week. That's her only reprieve. And if one of the kids is sick, it's like, yep, she's back with being mama again. So very little time, very little space, doesn't have a lot of agency, doesn't hold the finances, may or may not be able to afford one of your little products. Now, if she wants to take up cycling or get involved in cycling, or maybe not that at all, what do you have as an idea that maybe she could take action in some way to get herself or the kids riding, or perhaps something completely different? What do you have as an idea?
Is she cycling already, Wendy, or not at all?
She loves it, but she lives in a very car-dependent area, and in her little immediate area, it's okay. But once she gets out, it's a major highway. And no bike path, no footpath.
Since returning home to Australia, I have joined Bicycle Queensland, and I know that there's some nice resources on their website about getting going with cycling, some information about riding. I would definitely try to seek out a group of riders if there are other women maybe in the neighbourhood that you could do like a peer ride together just to get some headspace. That is really crucial as a mum to have some me time, isn't it? And I always find that when I get out on my bike, that's for me a time that I can think and have that relaxation. So even if she can try to maybe ask a friend or a partner just to give her a half hour out, watch the kids for a few minutes and try to get out on the bike, maybe just take back roads and quiet lanes, definitely avoid the super busy roads, and try to network with other cyclists because they're quite a friendly bunch, and I'm sure a lot of people would welcome to maybe buddy with her if she wasn't that comfortable as well to do a ride. There are obviously a lot of benefits to it if she can and has the resources to possibly get the children involved and have a bike themselves, be able to come out with her as well and introduce the children to cycling, then that's a lovely thing to do as well.
I think one of the things when you said to me about, oh, she could see who wants to go for a bike ride. Now, she's not a lycra gal. She doesn't have any of that. Her bike might be not an expensive one. It's not fancy, maybe not super great, dug out of the garage, and she'd love to get back onto it. I wonder if she's with those other people who are in a bike group, have you found that there's a bit of intimidation about joining one of those groups? People seem very fancy and they've got the right clothes and they've got the right bike.
And we're involved with a project in the UK in Essex, actually. And this is where the council have been fantastic. What the council have done there, they run a project called Essex Pedal Power. Free bikes are actually loaned out to people in the community. And it's not just dropping bikes out there. There's a sort of a wraparound, which includes training and buddying and these different services. Like fundamentally, it just makes good business. It's good for the whole society, for saving money on health and well-being and all of these things in the longer term if you can get more people on bikes. So the council's actually recognising that. And that's where the genesis of this program came. We started working with them when they had just 100 bikes, and they've actually expanded it to 2,000 bikes now, and they're going to get more. These are free bikes given out to people in the community, and it's been transformational for so many people. And it's definitely not that high-end Lycra brigade. This is people that maybe couldn't afford a bike on their own, and they're working with us at See.Sense because a lot of the people that are involved, they maybe wouldn't use an app even, or even own a smartphone. When they just get the bike, they can hop on the bike and ride. We capture the data about how often the bikes are ridden and people's experience on the bikes so that they can use it to justify the cost of the program, and that they can show, yes, people are riding the bikes and here's where they're riding them. They're actually riding them to get to the shops. They're riding them to get to the train station. They're riding them to get to work. And then the council's also got information about how they can build out the infrastructure to support that, because a lot of the infrastructure in the past was just cycleways to the city, the centre of the city and back, rather than the kinds of rides that mums or kids or others might do on these sort of utility trips. So this is creating all that evidence and data to build out the infrastructure around that. I would get some investment into some kind of scheme that can support mums or other women to get out, to maybe take some group rides. It's not that much really, if you think about cost of the bike or a program like this, in the grand scheme of things, for the overall benefit that it can bring in terms of health, well-being for people in the community. It's actually a really smart investment, as well as trying to encourage her to get out on her own, maybe with your help, to have a voice and try to get some of this kind of investment in your community, because I think it would be really great for women and children and lots of people to get more cycling.
Before we close out, I just want to check in and see if you have any other thoughts or ideas or anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm so happy to be back here in Australia. It's my home country, and I see the potential for cycling in countries that I've been overseas. I've just come back from Ghent in Belgium for the Velo City conference. They transformed their city by taking out cars from the middle of the city, and you can walk through the city. You can hear birds chirping. It's a much lovelier place. Placemaking is really more about what it is now. It's not just need more cycling. It's about building places for people. I see a lot of potential for Australia to catch up to that in some sense. It has moved on a long way since when I lived here 20 years ago, but there's still a long way to go. And there's a massive obsession with these huge big utes that seem to have arrived since I was here last. So I really want to see if I can make some contribution to help cities make that transformation, because it's definitely needed. As we get more and more people in our cities, we have to get smarter about how we design it. So I really want to be an active part in helping to shape cities and help cities grapple with the evidence and data they need to make that transition as efficiently as possible.
I have really enjoyed the conversation. Whenever I start these conversations, I never know where they're going to go and what's going to be shared. I had no idea about all of that. So that was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Wendy, for your time and helping to share what I do with your audience. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'll keep listening in.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, the more the merrier, definitely. Thanks a lot. All right, bye. Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.